Unfortunately, we've had to edit out some important information because big tech won't let us say that sort of thing. To listen to the full uncut show, go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Well, folks, we're about to see a market explosion in the Western world if capitalism is re-embraced, and that looks like that is about to happen. First, if you haven't heard, our best deal of the year is happening right now. Get 50% off new annual memberships, no code necessary. Go to dailywire.com/Black Friday to join right now. Well, the reality is that in the United States, as in most Western countries, the debt levels are reaching the unsustainable or have already surpassed the unsustainable. The amount of national debt currently carried by the United States is verging on $37 trillion. That means that the interest that we pay on the national debt will soon, if it is not already, exceed the defense budget every single year into the foreseeable future. And most of that debt is driven by welfare programs, means-tested welfare programs, badly structured welfare programs, entitlement programs like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. All of those programs are the systemic drivers of debt in the Western world. There are only two possible solutions to that, and both have to be applied at once. One is serious restructuring and cuts to spending programs in the United States, and the other is you have to unleash the power of the market so as to be increasing the size of the economy. Because if you increase the size of the pie, that means larger tax revenue intake, and that means that you can afford more things on a governmental level. The reason I bring this up is because what we were set for under Joe Biden and under his possible successors was a period of sustained economic stagnation in the United States. Before inflation set in, Joe Biden and his team had put out a prospectus on what American GDP growth would look like over the course of the next decade. And essentially, they forecast it would come in at lower than 2% from here until as far as the eye can see. That is not enough growth to sustain the sort of spending programs that the United States has been undertaking for decades at this point. Something serious needed to change. Well, if you look back in history, what you will see is that very often these sort of ideological precursors to shifts in the United States happen elsewhere. So, to take an economic example, maybe the most famous economic example, back in the 1970s, Chile was run by a dictator named Pinochet. Pinochet called in a bunch of supply-side economists from the so-called Chicago School of Economics. They were called the Chicago Boys. They were devotees of Milton Friedman, the libertarian economist. And Milton Friedman was then asked about what happened in Chile, because Chile then had outsized rates of growth. Private property rights were reestablished in Chile. Tax rates were lowered. A system of law was put in place that eventually led to the downfall of Pinochet himself and the rise of a democratic state in Chile. Here was Milton Friedman talking about it at the time.
The real miracle in Chile was not that those economic reforms worked so well. Chile is by all odds the best success story in Latin America today. The real miracle is not that those economic arrangements worked so well, because that's what Adam Smith said. The real miracle is that a military junta was willing to let them do it. See, as I said to begin with, the principles of the military is from the top down. The principle of a market is from the bottom up. Now, it's a real miracle that a military group was willing to let a bottom-up approach take over. But I will say that that process led to a situation in which you were able to get an election which ended the military junta, and you now have a democratic government. You cannot cite any similar example from the world of entirely socialist states.
So what exactly happened in Chile? Well, there were effectively three main pillars to what the Chicago Boys did in Chile. Economic liberalization, meaning fewer trade barriers, meaning ease of regulation, easier ability to make economic arrangements. Privatization of state-owned companies, so gigantic ownership of state-owned companies was then devolved upon private citizens. And finally, stabilization of inflation, which meant stop spending money and stop printing money in order to keep up with it. Okay, well, we are seeing the same thing happen right now in Argentina. In Argentina, Javier Milei has undertaken one of the great economic reform efforts in modern history, and it is absolutely working. He has brought the inflation rates down from the insane to the manageable. And he has done this over the course of just a few months. According to the Washington Post, inflation is tumbling just as he promised from a peak of almost 300%. A long-running budget deficit has turned into a surplus. Government bonds, once seen as almost certain to sink back into default, are rallying. The long moribund economy is finally starting to rebound. Milei himself said what lies ahead in 2025 is more of what we've already done: strict fiscal balance, no money growth, and deregulation. He said Argentina has suffered from an overdose of deficits, money printing, and useless regulation. All that needs to go. Now, of course, people on the left are very upset because when you do this sort of stuff, the immediate effect is that if you throw people off the welfare dole, for example, because there's too much spending in welfare, or if you stabilize the currency, what that means very often is that poverty rates in the very near term increase, and then they begin to decline radically, which is exactly, of course, what happened with Chile. And for the moment, Milei remains incredibly popular in Argentina. The reason I bring this up is because what happened in Chile was the precursor to the economic revolution that happened across the Western world, thanks to the success in Chile. So that was seen as a model by the Reagan administration, for example. It's why they pursued tax cutting. It's why they pursued deregulation and privatization of state-owned industries. The same thing happened in Margaret Thatcher's Britain. And what we are watching right now is those lessons that Milei is pushing applied to the rest of the Western world. That doesn't mean that Trump wouldn't have pursued it in the absence of Milei. It does mean you are watching a wave of economies beginning to recognize that the stagnating pseudo-socialistic policies that are pushed by so many members of the left actually end in economic ruin for nations. And that is now being disowned. Countries like the United States are moving away from that. Why do you think the business market is reacting so positively to President Trump's election? This is being recognized today by Ishan Tharoor, who's a columnist for the Washington Post. Quote, "For the American right, there's a new icon on the block. The week after Donald Trump's election victory, Argentine President Javier Milei appeared at a black tie bash at the president-elect's Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida, where he was received with the same effusive enthusiasm he himself took to the proceedings." Trump's first term overlapped with that of Brazil's hard-right firebrand, former President Jair Bolsonaro. But right now, his most obvious sort of kinship is with Milei. Since taking office in December, he has moved quickly, he has moved radically, slashing public spending, erasing several government ministries, deregulating broad swaths of the economy in Argentina. His zeal has won admirers in Trump world, where Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are keen to follow Milei's example. Ramaswamy has called for Milei-style cuts on steroids. Vivek, of course, is totally right about all of that. Meanwhile, Musk and Milei have a good relationship as well. Milei told the podcaster recently that Musk is, quote, "a great fighter for the ideas of freedom. He's helping the world nowadays wake up once and for all and become aware of the socialist virus that in itself makes him a hero in the history of humanity." And this, of course, is also going to open up new relations between the United States and nations in Latin and South America, which is going to be very good for the United States economy because, again, more allies engaged in comparative advantage and trade is better for the United States economy overall. So what we are watching is a model that has been applied in Argentina where it was in crisis mode, and that means crisis efforts have to be undertaken. If that is even applied in medium scale in the United States, you're about to see a boom unlocked in the United States unlike any in modern American history. That's why it's actually quite important what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are doing with the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. According to the Washington Post, they are currently interviewing job candidates and seeking advice from both experts in Washington and Silicon Valley. Both of them had lobbied for Russell Vought, Trump's eventual pick, to run the White House Budget Office. Vought is excellent. He's very intent on using the power of the executive to cut within the executive branch. Meanwhile, other Musk surrogates from his business empire, including private equity executive Antonio Gracias and Boring Company president Steve Davis, are involved in the planning. Other people involved include Palantir co-founder and investor Joe Lonsdale, who's an excellent investor. He also happens to be one of the leading sponsors of the University of Austin in Texas, which is an attempt to outcompete all of the crumbling universities of the Ivy Leagues. Investor Mark Andreessen, who of course is quite brilliant. Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, former Uber chief executive Travis Kalanick. Again, this makes a lot of sense. You're calling in the best business minds in the nation to take a look at precisely how to restructure the state of American government. And that, again, is going to unlock tremendous growth. Now, part of that is going to be, for example, unchaining Elon Musk's own businesses. One of the sort of chief symptoms of an economy that is overregulated and overrun with people who don't like free markets is the targeting of specific businesses at the top levels of government. One of the things that we have seen with both SpaceX and Tesla is an attempt by the Biden administration to crack down on Elon Musk almost personally. And by the way, that is continuing today in the state of California. Apparently, according to Bloomberg, Gavin Newsom is now pushing EV buyer credits, electric vehicle buyer credits in California. But the guidelines under consideration would leave out Tesla. So it's specifically designed in order to benefit Tesla's competitors. That's how much these people hate Elon Musk. It's almost insane. Gavin Newsom said, quote, "It's about creating the market conditions for more of these car makers to take root." So forget about whether people actually would like to buy Teslas in the state of California, which the answer is yes. Okay, and Tesla, as Elon Musk points out, is the only one making cars in California. So this move hurts jobs in California. It's all about using government to target Musk and to benefit his opponents. And that needs to stop. Well, folks on the left, they're very dishonest about business. They're also very dishonest about the brands you support indirectly. So here is the thing. Every time, for example, you give your money to one of the major businesses, very often that money may be going to some sort of cause you don't actually support. Well, Pure Talk, my cell phone company, supports veterans. They're leading the fight against woke corporations. Pure Talk is veteran-led. They actually put their money where their mouth is. They've alleviated $10 million in veteran debt. They donate tens of thousands of dollars every month to help prevent veteran suicide. They just donated $50,000 to Mike Rowe Works, providing scholarships to veterans learning trades after active duty. Pure Talk gives you the exact same coverage as the big carriers, America's most dependable 5G network, for literally half the cost. Why are you still giving your cash to Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, when there's a better option that actually supports our veterans? And when you switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk on a qualifying plan, you'll get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. That means unlimited access to our incredible library of content. Am I a Racist? What is a Woman? Mr. Bertram, Run, Hide, Fight, plus uncensored ad-free daily shows. And 1 year free of our new Daily Wire Kids platform, BentKey. The only way you can get that is by going to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Call and mention my name. Stop overpaying for your cell phone plan. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro today. Switch to that qualifying plan. Get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. Also, let me tell you about the holidays, the heart of family traditions. You know, those precious moments of being together where you're lighting the menorah or decorating the tree or sharing a meal. These traditions matter. But have you thought about death? I know you didn't see that coming, did you? Those traditions, they're going to continue when you're gone, but you will be gone. That means your family needs money when you're gone. Hence Policy Genius. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million in coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid those unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius makes finding and buying life insurance simple. They give your loved ones a financial safety net they can use to cover debt and routine expenses, or even invest that money to earn interest over time. Their digital tools let you compare quotes from America's top insurers side by side for free, no hidden fees. Their licensed support team is there to help you get exactly what you need. They answer questions, handle paperwork, and advocate for you throughout the entire process. Even if you already have life insurance through work, it might not protect all your family's needs. It probably won't follow you if you leave your job. Join thousands of happy Policy Genius customers who've left 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot. Secure your families tomorrow so you can have peace of mind today. Head over to policygenius.com/Shapiro. Get your free life insurance quotes. See how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/Shapiro. Brendan Carr, who's the new head of the FCC, he says that the government has to stop its lawfare against Elon Musk.
That type of lawfare is going to end for too long in this government, particularly over the last couple of years. Your last name dictated how the government treated you. If your last name was Soros, well, the commission bent over backwards and gave you a special, unprecedented commission-level shortcut to buy 200 radio stations. If your last name was Musk, well, then you lost $800 million contracts that you lawfully got. Everybody now is going to get a fair shake going forward.
Okay, that, of course, is the way that everybody ought to be treated in the market. Everyone ought to get a fair shake and play by the same exact rules. But again, the ire over Musk and his businesses is also driven by the fact that Musk is an agent for free speech, right? His buying of X has completely shattered the entire media complex. You have to understand, the only way that bad economic policy can continue to maintain its dominance in the West is if propagandistic efforts are put out on behalf of that bad economic policy. If you are told, for example, for years on end, that spending of oodles of government money, endless supply of government money, is not going to change the inflation rates, then you can get away with doing that for quite a while, which is precisely what happened until eventually the rubber meets the road. Bad economic policy, it doesn't sort of materialize gradually. Bad economic policy is like the guy who jumps off the 99th floor of a building, and at floor 50, somebody shouts to him, "How are you doing?" And the guy shouts back, "So far, so good." It's fine until you hit the ground. The point at which you hit the ground is where the economic policy begins to actually affect Americans. And you saw that under Joe Biden when the inflation finally hit. So it requires bad economic cover-ups by the media in order to make legitimate economic policies that should fail on the basic logic of them. And this is why the media democratic complex is so dangerous on every scale. It's dangerous in foreign policy, obviously. We've talked about that a lot. We'll talk about it more. it's incredibly dangerous in economic policy. Because when it comes to economic policy, most people don't understand basic economics. Most folks don't understand supply and demand. Most folks believe that the government tinkering in the markets is a generalized good as opposed to a generalized bad. And most people believe that government is there to, quote unquote, solve problems, as opposed to the reality, which is that government very often is creating and exacerbating those problems. And this is why I think among the factors that have led to the complete destruction of trust in the media, among those factors is the reality that the media backed the economic play of Barack Obama, which was bad. They backed the economic play of Joe Biden, which was bad. And now the media are fighting for their lives, because without this Democrat media human centipede, what are the media? Now, again, this does not mean that journalism isn't important. Journalism is very important. The point is that the journalistic establishment has utterly defeated itself by making itself subject to the whims of Democratic politicians. They are propagandists for Democrats, and that's why they've blown out their credibility. Jim Vandehey of Axios was fighting mad over this yesterday. So Jim Vandehey did a speech in which he ripped into Elon Musk, because Elon Musk suggested that basically the era of the legacy media was over and that they had been replaced. And he was speaking at the National Press Club, and he went nuts. This was apparently late last week.
Everything we do is under fire. Elon Musk sits on Twitter every day, or X today, saying like, we are the media, you are the media. My message to Elon Musk is, bull, you're not the media. You having a blue check mark, a Twitter handle, and 300 words of cleverness doesn't make you a reporter any more than me looking at your head and seeing that you have a brain and telling you have an awesome set of tools makes me a damn neurosurgeon.
Okay, that's a ridiculous comparison, because the reality is that the way you can tell that a neurosurgeon is by the fact that they perform brain surgery regularly and do so successfully. Right? That would make a good neurosurgeon. Similarly, when it comes to journalism, you don't get a journalism hat that you wear around, like one of those battered hats from the 1930s movies, like the His Girl Friday kind of stuff. You don't get a magical journalism hat that allows you to call yourself a journalist if, in fact, you are just a propagandist. And the reality is that so many of the so-called journalists are propagandists, including some of the folks over at Axios. Barak Ravid, for example, is just a stenographer on behalf of the Biden administration and Jake Sullivan. That's all he does all day long, is just take leaks from the Biden administration and then play that as journalism. Journalism theoretically requires you to actually investigate the hard questions and come up with actual answers to those questions. And that's something the media have steadfastly refused to do. And so what that's done is it's created a sort of bizarre dynamic where the media will sometimes report on facts, and then they will swathe that in a vast panoply of lies. And then people on social media will pick apart all of those lies. And so there's been this kind of bizarre parasitical relationship between the media and social media, in which the media report a bunch of bad stuff, and some of it's true, and a lot of it's not. And then social media comes through and filters through all of that and then declares itself the new media. And neither side is completely right. The media are not wrong that very often they're reporting facts. They are wrong that they're not propagandists. And social media is wrong if they say that what they're doing is very often journalism. Very often it's media criticism, which again is incredibly valuable in this arena, but it's not quite the same thing. Let me give you an example. So, amazing piece from Colin Wright over at his website, Reality's Last Stand, about the burying of a study on DEI. He says, quote, in a stunning series of events, two leading media organizations, the New York Times and Bloomberg, abruptly shelved coverage of a groundbreaking study that raises serious questions about the psychological impacts of diversity, equity, and inclusion pedagogy. That study, conducted by the Network Contagion Research Institute in collaboration with Rutgers University, found that certain DEI practices could induce hostility, increase authoritarian tendencies, and foster agreement with extreme rhetoric. With billions of dollars invested annually in these initiatives, the public has a right to know if such programs, heralded as effective moral solutions to bigotry and hate, might instead be fueling the very problems they claim to solve. The decision to withhold coverage raises serious questions about transparency, editorial independence, and the growing influence of ideological biases in the media. Again, the study basically found that DEI programs are disastrous and make the world a worse place. The New York Times, which has cited this particular think tank's work in nearly 20 previous articles, suddenly demanded this particular research undergo peer review, which they had never tried before. At Bloomberg, they quashed the story completely outright. Joel Finkelstein, the NCRI researcher leading the study, he says the editorial reversals are as revealing as the data itself. In communications with reporters, he described the findings as, quote, sobering with likely impact for DEI policy, as well as congressional impacts and potentially civil litigation. He said, this seems like an effort to suppress research that challenges prevailing narratives around DEI and worryingly implicates standard practices for egregious harms. And of course, he is totally right about this. And there's nothing new about this. We know, for example, that the media also silenced studies for years on, for example, trans medicine. They refused to report the reality of the failures of puberty blockers. I mean, the New York Times itself had to come out and report this. Quote, this is October 23rd. Quote, an influential doctor and advocate of adolescent gender treatments said she had not published a long-awaited study of puberty-blocking drugs because of the charged American political environment. That doctor began a study in 2015 as part of a broader multi-million-dollar federal project on transgender youth. The researchers followed children for 2 years to see if the treatments improved their mental health. The American trial did not find that it improved their mental health. In the 9 years since the study was founded, the team did not publish the data. Why? Well, the head of the team said, quote, the findings might fuel the kind of political attacks that have led to the bans of the youth gender movement in more than 20 states. Quote, I do not want our work to be weaponized, she says. They buried their own study. And the media are complicit in all of this. And then you wonder why there's an entire countervailing media structure. This is why the Daily Wire is important, because we are fighting back against all this. Yes, we have our own investigative reporters, and those people are in direct competition with the so-called reporters at Axios or the New York Times. But we also do engage in media criticism specifically for reasons like this. And understand, without the Democrats' propaganda machine, they could not get away with any of this. With any of this. They thought that the Democratic propaganda machine was so powerful that people would simply ignore the reality of their own lives when it came to things like inflation and continue to vote for Democrats, that they would ignore the reality of their own lives on whether boys can be girls. Well, it turns out that reality still exists, and bad policy can be covered up for a while, but eventually the reality of the hard ground meets the face of the bad policy after that policy is launched from a 99-story building, which is what we are watching right now. You know, Democratic policy is bad, and that means that eventually it's going to hit reality. But you know what is another reality? Too many babies in the womb are losing their lives. The radical left keeps saying that being pro-life is somehow being anti-woman. The left wants you to believe that killing babies is healthcare and that infanticide is reproductive freedom, which is morally ridiculous. Here's the thing. We don't just complain about the problem at preborn. We help solve it. That's where Preborn helps. Again, they're the largest pro-life organization in America. They're doing something extraordinary. They're actually empowering women, unlike the abortion industry that profits from their vulnerability. When a mom sees her baby on ultrasound, her likelihood of choosing life doubles. And Preborn doesn't just stop there. They provide support for up to 2 years after birth with diapers, car seats, counseling, actual healthcare, not the left's version. Here's how you can help save lives. Just $28. That's less than a week of coffee at Starbucks. Sponsors one ultrasound that could save a baby's life. And if you have the means, $15,000 will place an entire ultrasound machine in a women's center, saving countless lives for years to come. To donate, dial pound 250, say baby. That's pound 250, baby, or visit preborn.com/Ben. All gifts are tax deductible. Preborn has a 4-star charity rating. Preborn.com/Ben. Also, tired of the big corporations pushing their progressive agenda? The Daily Wire shop is your conservative gift headquarters. Black Friday deals are here. Score up to 70% off. Grab exclusive holiday bundles. Get the perfect stocking stuffers and gifts from the Ben Shapiro collection. Like, behold, this right here. The Kindly Go Fact Yourself mug. Or perhaps this. The Kindly Go Fact Yourself hat. Yes, there's so much good stuff over at the Daily Wire store. With great Daily Wire exclusive gifts under $30, there's something for everyone. Conservative uncles, friends, neighbors, that guy from work who jokes about HR's latest sensitivity training. Get the gifts that show how well you know them at dailywire.com/shop. Well, meanwhile, Democrats are freaking out, obviously, about the Trump administration. They're freaking out about what happens next with the Trump administration. And so now, shockingly, they are re-embracing the filibuster. According to the Washington Examiner, Senator Richard Blumenthal says, quote, I'd be lying if I said we'd be in a better position without the filibuster. We have a responsibility to stop autocratic and long-headed abuse of power or policy, and we'll use whatever tools we have available. We're not going to fight this battle with one hand tied behind our back. Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin sees the filibuster as part of the calculation as to how Democrats will spearhead resistance next Congress. Now, again, many of these same senators were ripping on Kyrsten Sinema for refusing to kill the filibuster. Sinema offered a curt response to Democrats now defending the filibuster. She tweeted, quote, you don't say. And that, of course, is exactly right. By the way, my business partner and best friend, Jeremy Boring, he has a suggestion for the Congress of the United States under Republican rule. I think it's an excellent suggestion. Essentially, his suggestion is that Senator Thune, when he comes in as the majority leader, when everybody is sworn in January, he should immediately suggest that the Constitution itself, an amendment be added to enshrine the filibuster permanently in the Constitution of the United States. That offer will expire 18 months from now. And if Democrats don't sign on, at that point, the Republicans blow up the filibuster and do whatever they want to do. Because the point that Jeremy is making, and he's totally right about this, is that Democrats are perfectly willing to destroy the filibuster the minute they get power. Republicans are happy to keep the filibuster all the way through. Well, one side only can't play by the rules. If only one side is playing by the rules, it's not a rule, it's a tool of discrimination. If Republicans are placing upon themselves the self-imposed restriction of the filibuster, which means they require 60 votes to pass serious legislation in the Senate, if they play by those rules, and then Democrats come in with 51 votes and nuke the filibuster, which is what Kamala Harris wanted if she'd become president of the United States. Well, if that's the story, and if Democrats now are willing to embrace the filibuster, well, it ought to be permanent for everybody, or it ought to be permanent for nobody. And so the proposal Jeremy makes, and I think, again, Senator Thune should take it up, I think the Republican Senate should take it up immediately, is constitutional amendment to enshrine the filibuster in the federal Constitution of the United States. That offer expires within 18 months. And 18 months from now, if Democrats are unwilling to go along with the enshrinement of the filibuster in the Constitution, meaning it just becomes a permanent feature of American political life, if they're not willing to do that with a Republican majority, when you know they'll nuke it the minute that they get a majority, then Republicans should nuke it first, and then they should do everything they want to do 18 months from now or a year from now. They should set a deadline. They should get 7 Democrats on board. I'm sure you can find some Democrats who will sign off on this. And then this becomes not an issue every single time a Democratic administration takes over. Because one of the things you have to notice about Democrats when it comes to things like, say, democracy or rule of law or the filibuster or even economic policy, everything is just a tool of power, everything. It is never a principled opposition to the filibuster or a principled opposition to the Electoral College or a principled opposition to anything. Democratic top-level lawmakers and their apparatchiks in the media, it's not about the principle. It's about how they can grab power and then exercise it to the maximum extent possible. Only Republicans in my lifetime have actually believed that institutions matter enough to uphold even at the expense of your agenda. Right? That's a controversial proposition, even in some Republican circles, but it happens to be a much more conservative way of viewing the world, that those institutions are really important because you're going to miss them when they're gone. And meanwhile, speaking of people who wish to blow up the institutions, Democrats continue to suggest that they are going to block President Trump's immigration policy. So, for example, Politico says Democratic attorneys general are preparing a raft of legal actions to prevent Donald Trump from carrying out mass deportations of undocumented immigrants, setting the stage for a series of showdowns over one of his central campaign pledges. In interviews with Politico, 6 leading blue state prosecutors said they are girding to take Trump to court over misusing military troops on domestic soil, attempting to commandeer local or state law enforcement to do the job of the federal government, and denying people's constitutional right to due process. So, of course, they have every ability to file these lawsuits. They will all end up at the Supreme Court. Attorneys general also said they would move to challenge Trump if he tries to federalize the National Guard or attempts to direct active duty military units or National Guard troops from red states into blue states. They're bracing to push back against his administration, sending immigration agents into schools and hospitals to target what they call vulnerable populations. Now, there are some Democrats who are going even further than that. They're not just going to file lawsuits, which of course is well within their purview. That's how the system works. They're pledging that they're going to actively resist. So, for example, Mayor Mike Johnston, who is the far left-wing Democratic mayor of Denver, he is now pledging that he is going to use the city's police department to physically oppose ICE. He then had to backtrack that because after he warned that he was going to use his police forces to actually clash with ICE, use the Denver Police Department to go up against ICE, Tom Homan said, okay, well, that's against the law and I'm perfectly happy to arrest you. Here was Tom Homan saying that yesterday.
Tom, you heard this mayor out there in Colorado. I want to get your reaction to it, and I want you to be clear about who has jurisdiction, the federal government or state and local governments. And if you're a sanctuary state or city, are you breaking the law?
You're absolutely breaking law. All you have to do is look at Arizona versus U.S. You'll see these breaking law. But look, me and the Denver mayor, we agree on one thing. He's willing to go to jail. I'm willing to put him in jail. Because there's a statute, it's Title 8 United States Code 1324 III, and what it says is, it's a felony if you knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien from immigration authorities. It's also a felony to impede a federal law enforcement officer. So if we don't want to help, that's fine. He can get the hell out of the way. But we're going to go do the job. President Trump has a mandate for American people. We got to secure this country. We got to save American lives. And I find it shocking that any mayor of a city would say, President Trump's been clear, we want to concentrate on public safety threats and national security threats. I find it hard to believe that any mayor or governor would say they don't want public safety threats removed from their neighborhoods. I mean, I don't know what the hell is going on in Denver, but we're going to go and we're going to fix it. If he don't want to fix it, if he don't want to protect his communities, President Trump and ICE will.
Okay, again, the Democrats' attempts to overrule the rule of law in favor of their own political preferences, it's going to have some real downstream effects on them politically. Meanwhile, Homan also says that they're going to slash funds to any state that attempts to obstruct deportations.
To me, you've got a powerful weapon, among others, which is, okay, no federal funds. Boom. Last thoughts.
And that's going to happen. I guarantee you, President Trump will do that. President Trump has made it clear. We're going to prioritize public safety threats and national security threats right out of the gate because they pose the most danger to this country. What governor or mayor doesn't want public safety threats and national security threats out of their neighborhoods, out of their communities? That's your number one responsibility. So you can hate Trump all you want, but you got to love your community more than you hate President Trump.
Homan's such a bulldog. Love that guy. He's great. Meanwhile, Democrats, again, they're trying to resist all of this. Democratic Representative Kwasi Mfume of Maryland, he's trying to be clever here on MSNBC. And he says, listen, we don't want the Justice Department to be the just ICE department. Well, it won't be just ICE, but it's going to be partially enforcing ICE detainers.
The first thing is to make sure that to the extent that we can get the nominee for Attorney General on the record through Senate confirmation hearings where they're going to be asked and should be asked tough questions. That's the first thing. I mean, we don't want the Justice Department to turn into the just ICE department when it comes to black and brown people and women in this country.
Again, if this is the form that your rule of law takes, the Orwellian use of terms like rule of law and democracy to just mean whatever Democrats want it to mean is really bad. And the fact that the media have gone along with this sort of stuff, they've gone on with this Orwellian nonsense for so long, is the reason, again, that trust has dropped. We'll get to more on that in a moment. First, our Daily Wire Plus Black Friday sale is now live. Get 50% off new annual memberships right now. Normally, this is where I'd share a code, but we don't got it today because we don't need a code. Just head on over to dailywire.com/Black Friday. Claim your new Daily Wire Plus membership for 50% off. With Daily Wire Plus, you get it all. Uncensored daily shows with limited ads, live breaking news you can trust, and premium entertainment reshaping culture. From the decade's #1 documentary, Am I Racist?, to exclusive series and hit movies, Daily Wire Plus offers it all and more. Your support makes this fight possible. Don't wait. Join the fight. Save 50% today. Go to dailywire.com/Black Friday. So, will Democrats break out of the self-created matrix, or will they simply continue to engage further and further in the Democratic media complex in the hope that they will be able to rescue their bad agenda through the help of a propagandistic media? That's the real question here. And it's an open question. I don't know the answer to it. I'm not sure they know the answer to it. James Carville seems absolutely puzzled. James Carville, again, he was speaking some sense throughout the election cycle, saying that Democrats should not run as insane progressives. It didn't work out for him. Here he is saying, guys, maybe we should lay off all of the politically correct nonsense and, try to win elections from time to time.
Back in March, I said that I thought Democratic campaign culture had, quote, too many preachy females, unquote. Well, they all had a conniption. If you looked at the male vote that we got in November, no one since November has come up and said a thing to me. Primarily, we have a large problem with males. And I'm not just talking about white males like you and I'm talking about males all across. And we need to address that. And we don't need to be shouted down by Washington liberal advocacy groups at NPR. We got to say, we got a male problem and we need to get to work on it.
Hey, again, he is totally right about this. Will the Democratic Party even allow him to say that? Meanwhile, some of the other Democrats who are rising up against the progressive culture, we'll see how they do. Richie Torres, who is a very pro-Israel and somewhat moderate Democratic office holder. He's a representative from the Bronx. He is not ruling out a run for governor against fellow Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul. That would be a good indicator that the Democratic Party was starting to re-embrace reality if Torres were able to take out Hochul, for example. In an interview on Wednesday, Torres said he'd made no final decision, But he said that the gains that Donald Trump made in traditionally Democratic New York in this year's election are, quote, a vote of no confidence in the leadership of New York State, which, of course, is exactly right. Kathy Hochul has a 36% favorability rating among likely voters, 51% unfavorable. In an interview recently with Politico, Torres gave a withering assessment of Hochul. He drew a comparison to Democrats' efforts this summer to pressure Joe Biden to drop his reelect bid. He said, I fear Hochul may be the new Biden. She may be in denial about the depth of her vulnerabilities in 2026. In the case of Biden, instead of speaking out early, we waited until it was too late. Let's avoid repeating history. Let's avoid sleepwalking toward disaster and defeat. Now, again, it seems to me that whatever comes next in the Democratic Party, it's going to have to be insurrectionist against the top levels of the Democratic Party. And so there are two ways to read that. One way is that the Democratic Party is old. It's actually moderate. It was Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And actually, if you want to rebel against the Democratic Party, you need an outsider like a Bernie Sanders or an AOC in order to really break all the things. And that person is going to run to success inside a withered husk of the Democratic Party. The other way to read it is that actually the guiding forces of the Democratic Party have been wokeness and intersectional culture with a thin patina of moderation. And if you actually want to fix the Democratic Party, you need an insurrection from inside the Democratic Party that is moderate in nature. It seems to me that probably the Democratic Party will simply attempt to paper over those differences again. That is the only reason that you are hearing now a rumor that Kamala Harris may come back. I'm not even kidding with you. Politico has an article today titled, Harris is telling her advisors and allies to keep her political options open. Oh boy. So you are handed the vice presidency on a platter after running a terrible presidential campaign. You then are handed a presidential nomination where you won zero, count them, 0 votes, and then you proceed to raise $1.5 billion and spend all of it in 100 days, and you lose, and you ain't done yet. And why is anyone looking at Kamala Harris? Because again, who is the person that they look to? The Democratic bench is unbelievably thin. It's Gavin Newsom, who is off-putting, who runs an unsuccessful state, who is generally too progressive for the American people, and who's preachy to boot, is J.B. Pritzker, who I have no idea why anyone would consider J.B. Pritzker a national candidate. There's nothing, literally nothing about J.B. Pritzker except for the fact that he can sign himself giant checks that says national candidate about J.B. Pritzker. Gretchen Whitmer committed some of the dumbest campaign blunders I have ever seen in this campaign, including, of course, that bizarre Doritos video, the communion video. And like she's a weirdo. Like this is not a good bench. Democrats may think they have a good bench. They do not have a good bench. And so they might just go back to the well with somebody like Kamala Harris. According to Politico, privately, the vice president has been instructing advisors and allies to keep her options open, whether for a possible 2028 presidential run or even run for governor in her home state of California in 2 years. She keeps saying over and over, I'm staying in the fight, which, please, I would love it. One former Harris aide said, quote, she doesn't have to decide if she wants to run for something again in the next 6 months. The natural thing to do would be to set up some type of entity that would give her the opportunity to travel and give speeches and preserve her political relationships. A person close to Harris said, there will be a desire to hear her voice. There won't be a vacuum for long. Well, no, actually. There is no desire to hear her voice. It's just a sign of the desperation inside the Democratic Party that she is considered a possible front runner for something like 2028. What an empty party they are, and what an absolute inability. Yeah, one of the things about having a dominant media complex that is in your pocket is that it creates a bubble from which you are unable to escape. It makes you uniquely vulnerable. You're basically John Travolta in the Bubble Boy movie. You have a genetic condition that doesn't allow exposure to the regular elements of politics, and you are protected from those elements by the shiny bubble that is the media. And the minute that bubble collapses, which is what's been happening over the course of the last several years, the minute the bubble collapses, you have no systemic immunity to the normal forces of politics. It's not just that they've been exposed to the normal vacillations of politics, meaning their bad policy and the effects of them. It's also they've been exposed to a new media ecosystem, including people like us here at the Daily Wire. Right? And they don't have any systemic immunity to this. The kind of blowback Democrats have been facing over the course of the last 3 years is nothing compared to what every single Republican in my lifetime has faced from the legacy media. The difference is Republicans grew up in the darkness. They're like the bane of politics, right? From Dark Knight Rises. They were born in the darkness. They're accustomed to it. Democrats have never experienced this before because of the media. It's created a systemic lack of immunity for Democrats. And thus they have to keep saying dumb things. And it's going to take a while for them to develop the normal reflexes that you require to succeed in politics. Okay, meanwhile, in international news, NATO's military chief is now calling on business leaders to prepare for what he is calling a wartime scenario. Now, again, this is not a giant shock. Obviously, he's going to do that given the fact that Vladimir Putin is doing a lot of signaling right now. He's threatening a lot of action right now. Here's the NATO military chief, Admiral Rob Bauer, calling on business leaders to prepare for a more wartime scenario with regard to Russia.
Business leaders in Europe and America need to realize that the commercial decisions they make have strategic consequences for the security of their nation. Businesses need to be prepared for a wartime scenario and adjust their production and distribution lines accordingly. Because while it may be the military who wins battles, it's the economies that win wars.
Now, again, that point that he is making there is actually a correct point. He's not saying that businesses have to start building bomb shelters. He's saying stop being reliant on opponents of the West if you wish to have a robust economy and a competitive economy with some of the worst people on earth. That is actually true. Meanwhile, the UK and France are starting to pick up the slack in Ukraine, which is precisely what Donald Trump has actually called for. He's called for Europe to be picking up more of the slack in the Ukraine war. According to Express in the UK, Britain and France are now in talks to send troops to Ukraine to deter Vladimir Putin. They want to create a core of allies in Europe as fears intensified that President Trump could withdraw military support for Ukraine. British and French troops could be among European allies deployed to deter the Kremlin from attacking Ukraine again. And they could train Ukrainian forces similar to how they did before Moscow ordered a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. One military source told Le Monde, which is a French newspaper, quote, discussions are underway between the UK and France regarding defense cooperation, particularly with the aim of creating a core of allies in Europe focused on Ukraine and broader European security. And again, I think that this is perfectly normal and probably called for, given the fact that any peace agreement is going to have to include some sort of trigger force in Ukraine to prevent Vladimir Putin from going in and restarting this war. So that is the current situation with Ukraine. Again, I think all of the sort of overblown talk about World War III is about to break out. No, it isn't. It isn't. What Russia is signaling right now is escalation in order to de-escalate. Okay, that's the actual goal. Everyone in this particular region is now looking for an off-ramp because they see Trump coming down the pike. By the way, the fact that Donald Trump is about to come into office is changing calculations in the Middle East as well. So yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu's government announced that they would be holding a security cabinet meeting on Tuesday evening to discuss the possibility of a ceasefire with Hezbollah and with the Lebanese government. According to CNN, Netanyahu signaled his potential approval for the emerging ceasefire with Hezbollah during a security consultation with Israeli officials on Sunday night. On Monday, his spokesperson told CNN the Israeli cabinet would vote on the proposed deal on Tuesday, and they said that it is expected to pass. So what exactly is happening here? Obviously, when it comes to Netanyahu agreeing to a ceasefire, that's because it is a ceasefire, not an end to the war. What is Netanyahu doing here? Well, if this were an end to the war, one thing is very clear. Netanyahu would be calling for Israeli citizens to return to the north. The entire stated goal of the current war with Hezbollah for Israel is to make sure that Israeli citizens can go back to their homes in the north. A wide swath of the northern border of Israel has been completely depopulated by Hezbollah rockets since effectively October 8th, when Hezbollah started firing hundreds and thousands of rockets into northern Israel in an attempt to kill Israeli civilians. And Israel didn't initiate its actual retaliation and military operations, large-scale military operations in Lebanon until just October, until last month. So what is Israel doing right here? A few things. One, they're running short on ammunition. That is because of the Biden administration slow walking the ammo. And they know that Joe Biden, on his way out the door, is going to try to do something to Israel. This is just well within the purview of Democratic administrations. Barack Obama, on his way out the door, allowed the passage of a UN Security Council resolution that effectively declared the most historic parts of Jerusalem to be historic Palestinian territory. I mean, it's an absurdity because Barack Obama, of course, hated Israel. The same thing is true, presumably, the Biden administration. You expect to see them deliver some sort of backhanded slap at Israel in an attempt to placate their progressive base. You have, of course, people like Senator Chris Van Hollen, schmuck that he is, suggesting that he hopes that Joe Biden strong arms Israel. These are the people that Joe Biden is attempting to placate.
We've seen this pattern where President Biden makes demands of Prime Minister Netanyahu only to be ignored or slapped down entirely. And then President Biden sends more bombs and more money. Mm-hmm. That is not an effective use of leverage. So I do hope in these closing months, the president will finally make more effective use of American leverage to, at the very least, uphold American law, to insist that the Netanyahu government allows humanitarian aid into Gaza, and they use our weapons in a manner consistent with the laws of war.
Okay, so again, this is the Democratic Party Joe Biden is facing down. Netanyahu and the Israeli government know this, of course. Remember, there's a right-wing coalition in Israel. There are members of the right-wing coalition who are unhappy with this particular agreement. The government isn't going to fall over that. Why? Well, what's happening right now is basically an attempt by Netanyahu to buy time until Trump. That's all this is. It is a 60-day ceasefire. There are currently 57 days, 56 days until Joe Biden leaves office. That number is not a coincidence. A 60-day ceasefire is designed to get Israel beyond the Biden administration. They're counting it down in Israel. They're counting it down because Donald Trump and his administration have already pledged they're not going to withhold the armaments that Israel requires. At that point, Israel will be rearmed. They will arm up. Hezbollah will certainly not keep by this agreement because they have no intention on keeping by the agreement. They'll start smuggling weapons south of the Litani River again, at which point Israel will go in and finish the job. Right? That is what this whole thing is about. It's also about, presumably, trying to create space for some sort of hostage arrangement with Hamas. Why? Because Hamas, in the Gaza Strip, has been attempting this entire war to get other parties to intervene to save it. They've been attempting to get Hezbollah to intervene to save them and distract Israel. Iran to intervene and save them. The Houthis to save them. Well, now, the Houthis, aside from firing an occasional drone into Israel, really are not a serious threat to Israel. The Iranians have fired 2 rounds of large-scale missiles. They're not going to do that now because they know Trump is coming in. And Israel will have a green light to do things like destroy the nuclear facilities if they do it again. Hezbollah will be effectively off the table, and that means the space to push Hamas as hard as humanly possible to release the hostages because there's no one coming to save them in the near future. So there are a bunch of factors here. Lack of weaponry, Biden pressure, and most of all, the fact that Donald Trump is coming. Again, the Israeli government is openly saying at this point that this is about a cessation, but it is not a full-scale ceasefire. That they are effectively delaying the war until a time where they have a White House that is not going to be oriented toward making concessions to terrorists. So again, this Israeli official says that Israel's freedom to act in Lebanon after the ceasefire is guaranteed by a letter between it and the United States. The IDF will be able to operate not only against those trying to attack Israel, but against Hezbollah's attempt to build up its military power, and we will act, the official said. Israel decided it had no choice but to accept a ceasefire because they were afraid the U.S. administration would punish Israel with a UN Security Council resolution in the final weeks, and they're missing certain capabilities, including 134 D9 bulldozers, according to the official. So, again, it's a tactical move by Israel to take a short respite here, and that is happening because they see Trump coming. If Trump were not coming, Israel would pursue this thing all the way to the end, and they would do it right now with whatever weapons they had. It just goes to show you how the weakness of the Biden administration has led to a more dangerous world. That's the actual story as to what's happening over this particular ceasefire. Alrighty, in just 1 second, we'll get to what's happening at the International Criminal Court. Alan Dershowitz putting together a dream team to defend Western civilization against the idiocy of the International Criminal Court. If you're not a member, become a member, use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.